Every single one of us has a wish. Buried inside, we each have a dream and a place we aspire to have. Each one of us has that one thing we want that just seems so unreachable. What's more important though, what we have or what we dream of having? Would you even recognize what you really need over something you want more? It's sad. Sometimes it takes losing what we have to realize what we truly needed. They say there's an island that has the ability to answer dreams and wishes, dreams of the children who really need them answered. This island has a blessing and a curse to it, so they say. No one really talks of its curses, only of its blessings. You know what they say though, every blessing comes with a curse if you're not careful. Putting that aside, that certain child can make it to that island. All they have to do is desire hard enough. It's weird though. Some kids can desire their little hearts out and still never reach that island. I think it's selective, because kids have reached that island. Kids have had their dreams answered there. Garrett, age 14, had a desire of his own. Funny, kids like Garrett had never heard of the island. In fact, no one hears of the island unless they've lived on it. Garrett was one of those kids that the island chose to take in. He was a scrawny kid, never weighed over 96 pounds, he wore glasses, and his mind was full of imagination. Not only did he keep his mind open to anything, he also had a good grasp on reality. He was a smart kid, straight A student, and he even took his extra credit classes. He had a family with 2 sisters, a brother, a mom, and a dad. All of his family was great. No complaints from Garrett. So you'd think his life was pretty good. Still waters run deep, so they say. Everything wasn't fine. 2 stepbrothers and an uncle made sure of that every night in the back shed. So why not complain? Why never open your mouth and scream help? Why never tell the ones around you? Surely they would believe you, right? Even if they did, whether scared to death or just disgraced, telling this stuff was out of the question. Another silent secret Garrett had was that he had no friends. He was completely alone. Sure, his family was nice, aside from the uncle and stepbrothers, but a family isn't always the same as a best friend. You see, a family has to love you, and sometimes they really want to love you, and they do. But with best friends, they choose to love you. No force involved, no strings attached. They love you regardless if there's a benefit to it or not. So you can imagine that Garrett really wanted a friend. I bet you're wondering how Garrett made it to the island. It wasn't a huge ordeal. There was no loud bang, nor was there a cute fairy with pixie dust, or an old lady with a wand. In fact, Garrett didn't even go try to rub any lamps for hopes of a genie. Sure, the thought crossed his mind, but fantasy movies are a fast way to depress yourself. No, Garrett wasn't like that. June 18th was his great-grandmother's birthday. He wanted to go wish her happy birthday and such, but he was home-ridden with a book report. His family told him bye and said they'd be back at the end of the week. His mom leaned down to kiss his forehead. I know we've all heard the phrase kiss of death, and in all honesty, I think Garrett would have wanted that rather than what she said with the kiss. The promise of his uncle staying at the house for the week was more than enough to wish for death itself. No escape this time. No coming inside to a silent family asleep, knowing you could crawl in bed and not be followed by the person you fear. No. This time he'd have to come inside, sharing a roof with the person he feared the most. And there would be no happiness in crawling in bed while having the knowing fear that the very person you fear the most is right behind you. The kiss of death was greeted by Garrett, but no kiss of death came. Showing up at school that week with bruises wasn't that big of a deal to anyone. Garrett didn't know anyone at the school, and no one cared to know him. Thus, no one paid any mind to the cut-up face, the bruised neck, or the unseen bruised thighs. Not even teachers paid Garrett much mind. You'd figure the bruises would draw attention to himself, but in a school with so many kids, it's hard to keep an eye on everyone. No one saw what was going on. On the outside, he seemed normal enough to blend in, but on the inside, he was dying. He was exhausted emotionally and physically. Every inch of him wanted to scream out for help, but it was almost too much to put on someone else. Even if he tried, who would listen? To them, he was just another figure down the school halls. He was halfway into the week, and still the nights were just as disgracing as the ones before. It was Thursday night. Only a few more days until his family got home. He placed his bag by his bed and began to do his schoolwork. He was silent as usual. His uncle's upcoming footprints down the hall seemed regulatory by now. He lowered his pencil as tears dripped from his eyelids. The door opened and his uncle stepped in. The cycle began. Garrett laid in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The clock on his wall read 3 a.m. Still, he hadn't slept at all. His body was still shaking, and no matter how hard he tried, the shaking wouldn't subside. He kept crying. His stomach was in knots, not only from the stress of it all, but also from the fact that he hadn't eaten in a few days. His body was too stressed for him to even keep the food down. Even if he tried to eat at home, that meant leaving his room, and that was something he did not want to do. His eyes watered over and he blinked away the tears. No faster than the blinking of his eyes, the room was no longer his room. His bed was no longer a rough mattress. His walls were no longer blue. The sound of the TV in the hall was no longer heard, and the fear in his heart was no longer present. With his heart, he wanted out from his home. Subconsciously, he shoved back the need to ask for help. Completely, the island took him in and answered his wish.